Hi everyone, Clara is here again. Welcome to Difference Frames the World, a permanently demonetized alternative voice to mainstream media. Viewers can subscribe to our channels on Telegram, Rumble, Locals and Odyssey, which will host every video we have made, including some sensitive ones that we are not allowed to post here. Today we talk about the two oxidized U.S. warships that crossed the Taiwan Strait on August 28, 2022. Two retiring U.S. cruisers, USS Antietam and USS Chancellorsville, were escorted by the Chinese military's 23 warplanes and 8 warships through the Taiwan Strait, flexing their wrinkles, not muscles, in front of the whole world. China's Eastern Theater of Operations was on alert to monitor the entire movement of those U.S. ships. The Chinese Army's spokesman said troops in the war zone were on high alert and ready to thwart any provocation. In a previous video, we mentioned that China's warplanes and warships would take good care of America's visiting destroyers, like parents sending their babies to kindergartens. It sounded hilarious, but the reality was more entertaining. Since U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi paid her sneaky visit to Taiwan after repeated warnings from Beijing, the situation in the Taiwan Strait has become more tense and complicated than before, and the Chinese Army permanently changed the deliberately maintained status quo, as the U.S. and its allies suggested in their press notes, when China mainland blockaded Taiwan. In the past months, we have relentlessly discussed the rising danger of a military conflict when the U.S. and Taiwan's independence elements conspire to challenge the One China principle. China mainland is unwilling to resolve the Taiwan issue by force if it is not cornered. It still hopes that Taiwan will reunite with the mainland peacefully, which is least likely even if the Kuomintang party wins the election in the coming years. More than 300 years ago, Qing dynasty recovered Taiwan through military might and negotiations, which can help us understand today's situation in Taiwan. We will make a video comparing it with today's deadlock this week. We refer to today's situation in the Taiwan Strait as a deadlock, and there is a reason. Militarily and economically, Taiwan cannot withstand assaults from Beijing. Still, foreign forces want to use the island as a tool to stop China's rise under the guise of protecting the so-called freedom and democracy on the Chinese renegade island. No U.S. politicians and their counterparts in the West would care about the 23 million people on the island, as they have treated Ukrainians in the past 6 months. However, China is different from Russia, and Taiwan is not a sovereign country like Ukraine. Unless the U.S. and its allies want to cut their ties with Beijing, and they are willing to give up the world's biggest market that boasts 1.4 billion customers for the sake of a small island's fake democracy and human rights, which even the DPP authorities do not care, no one would fight China mainland. As many critics on the island point out, Tsai Ing-wen would lament the loss of Shinzo Abe, with Taiwan's flags at half-staff, and showed her deep regret for the new Japanese Prime Minister for his positive test result, as if mourning Joe Biden's beloved dog. Still, she never tweeted a sorry for hundreds, or thousands, of wretched Taiwanese young people who have been abused in Cambodia. Is Taiwan a democracy or a regime? For whose freedom and human rights is the DPP government fighting? Can the independence elements get support once a military operation starts? From the 2 rusty U.S. destroyers, most people should have the answer. We must express our admiration for the U.S. military's wisdom in sending 2 Grandpa-class warships, which are not much younger than the incumbent U.S. President and House Speaker, to show its skittish resoluteness to stand with Taiwan. We said in a previous video that America's rusty warships do not fit the beautiful landscape on Asia's coastlines. Still, they staggered through the Taiwan Strait despite China mainland's warnings now and then, an apparent provocation to mainland China and support for the island's separatist forces. The move is in response to Beijing's lockdown exercises in Taiwan. When White House official Kurt Campbell told the outside world that the United States would soon engage in standard air and sea passage in the Taiwan Strait, most people believed the USS Reagan aircraft carrier was a perfect choice. USS Ronald Reagan did make several suspicious moves, like a drunkard between Taiwan, the Philippines and Japan. In 1996, 2 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups did not give the Chinese Army a chance to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. However, in 2022, the U.S. only sent 2 corroded ships, one of which is to retire in 2024, and another in 2026, supposedly, through the alleged international water it claimed. According to the pictures disclosed, the two grannies or grandpas demonstrated their friendliness to the Chinese side with open cabins, showing their messy interiors to both sides of the strait. In sharp contrast with Washington's high profile that has escalated the situation in the Taiwan Strait, which prompted many international analysts to speculate that the U.S. military would send the USS Reagan carrier battle group over the Taiwan Strait, during which it would take off fighter jets. The United States hid two destroyers amid fishing boats. Whether the U.S. wants to admit it or not, it has lost control of the first island chain to contain China in the West Pacific, and Japan has been pushed forward to confront China's mainland. The problem is that the Japanese may not be willing to serve as America's cannon fodder, and Washington could hardly achieve its goal of stopping China's reunification by shedding the last drop of Japanese soldiers' blood. Many say the U.S. sent two rusty ships to the region to show its commitment to Taiwan without provoking China's mainland too much, which we disagree with. A provocation is a provocation, and China has to lodge stern protests, even if Beijing and Washington have reached some under-table deals to allow the U.S. to save its face with such a symbolic move. Chinese Ambassador Qin Gang and U.S. Deputy State Secretary Wendy Sherman met several days ago, and were unhappy with each other. They should have made some compromises in this regard, although none of them wanted to admit it. Politics is a game, a dirty one to be exact. With China's quick rise, the United States only has two options: to accept China as a new superpower and cooperate with Beijing, which is a win-win for both, or to fight it as it did with other emerging countries like Germany, Japan, and the European Union, which might end America's hegemony even if it could contain China. A lose-lose war for two of them and the rest of the world. Apparently, the United States has not decided yet, and the risk of having a hot war or a proxy war between Beijing and Washington is still high. Many analysts in the U.S. believe that if the U.S. wants to have a war with China, it is better to be now than later. The military-industrial complex needs a massive conflict with a big country to maximize its profit. At the same time, the United States benefits from a prosperous China, and many U.S. multinational companies cannot afford to lose China's market. Not long ago, Apple demanded all its suppliers in Taiwan to mark Chinese Taipei, or Taiwan, China, as the origin when shipping components to China's mainland, which has illustrated America's big companies do not want to anger China's mainland as they did in Russia. As we constantly said before, the U.S. wants to sell Taiwan at a good price, and it gained massive interest from China's mainland by playing the Taiwan card. But this time, the U.S. realized that Taiwan was not its hostage anymore, and Beijing refused to pay the ransom. The U.S. government does not have much time left, and it will soon decide whether it should have a war with Beijing. Militants, such as Bolton and his like, do not fully control the deep state behind the government, and all interest groups have their representatives in the White House and Capitol Hill. Not all U.S. politicians and lawmakers are stupid, and they know whether the U.S. military can win a war with Beijing at China's doorstep. Reports reveal that unexpected and frequent clogging haunts the U.S. Navy's newest aircraft carriers, and the Army must flush each carrier's sewage system with a $400,000 acid wash. It means House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has to work for years to earn enough after-tax compensation to accumulate nearly $500,000 to flush those toilets, if she is willing to foot the bill, which is the last thing she will do for the country. After spending around $90 million to fly her to the Chinese renegade island in early August 2022, the United States has gained nothing from her provocative visit. Instead, the U.S. has lost its face in front of the world, and many of its allies, including South Korea and Australia, are approaching China. This time, the U.S. can still dispatch two rusty warships to flex their wrinkles in the Taiwan Strait, nominally showing its presence in the region. In the foreseeable future, however, it will be difficult for Washington to send any ships to the Taiwan Strait after retiring dozens of such oxidized vessels. The good part is that its ally, Japan, boasts great artisans who can make fascinating paper cranes, and Pentagon could order hundreds of thousands of them and sail them through the so-called international water. At the end of today's video, we must thank supporters and patrons for their donations via GoFundMe, PayPal, Patreon, WeChat, and Buy Me a Coffee. Without their financial and spiritual support, we cannot keep DFTW alive so long after the platform demonetized our channel 8 months ago on the pretext of our videos providing no value to viewers.